Welcome back to Worry is Fun and Easy. This will be our part 4. And in this training, this isn't a training, this is I don't even know what this is really. So whatever this is, we'll be talking about the difference between worry that becomes really illness, psychiatric illness, versus worry that is just kind of intense. Really, we'll be talking about what is the difference between eccentricity or oddness, just being odd in some way, and illness or pathology. So that's really going to be the topic. Like, how do you determine illness versus pathology? And I hope I can give you an easy answer for that, and then some suggestions as far as what to do. So again, I'm James Clay, clinical psychologist, and putting together this training for people who are worriers, like myself. So if you've been following updates from the last 3, I said that over the last one that I was skeptical about states reopening. And I was worried about it, and I would force myself to carefully look at that belief and see if it has merit. See if opening states really is too dangerous, or look at the data and see if my mind changes. And my mind is more open, much more open now. After looking at various factors such as the suffering caused by possible financial collapse and unemployment, changing numbers in coronavirus, I just say my mind is open and I'm watching, and it's much more open than it was last week. So I used those cognitive tools of, really looking closely, opening my mind, losing my preconceived notions, setting my emotions aside for logic. And it was somewhat helpful. I think my mind is much more open. So that's an update from last time, and I've gotten some feedback that my use of special effects or goofy stuff like that is a little distracting, and this is a pretty serious topic. So for today, I'm not going to be using any special effects, and I hope that those of you who were annoyed by those special effects will appreciate this one a little bit more. Okay, so talking about oddness, so just being odd versus illness, right? Versus pathology, versus sickness. How do we know if our worry needs some treatment or if it's normal? I'm sure there's a word, there should be a word on your screen that says normal in quotes, right? Because nobody really knows what normal is, and it doesn't matter. We are not, in this profession, a normal police. We're looking for something else to help people with. We don't want to be normal. We don't want the people we serve to be normal. We want something else. And I'll talk about that in a second. So you might have noticed that I myself am a little eccentric. So how do I tell the difference between eccentricity and illness for myself? I'm sure you all notice I'm a little off the beaten path and a little strange. Excuse me. So for me, let me tell you, I'm going to confess something that I don't confess to many people, and I know there's probably maybe one person watching this. Hey, Steve Mock. So I'm going to confess to Steve and anybody else that might happen to be watching that sometimes I have what's called trichotillomania, meaning sometimes I pull out beard hairs when I'm really nervous. And at times, I've had some kind of exposed areas of my beard. So how do I tell if that's eccentric or if it's illness? Well, we'll actually get to that. But I'll tell you, that's a pretty weird thing, to pick at your beard until the hairs come out. It's strange, isn't it? Especially when you're anxious. We'll get into, again, how to really tell the difference with this stuff. And let me tell you, I know that my sense of humor is beyond eccentric. There's something wrong with me, but there's just nothing I can do about it. There's nothing. It's stuck with me. So and we'll be getting to how to determine, I'm getting off topic there a little bit, how to determine if worry specifically is becoming kind of an illness as opposed to just an odd experience that will go away. So let's talk about odd beliefs or practices. Many of them are based on finding community. Now I'm gonna give you a quick example of how important community is. All right, community meaning social contacts with other people. In person is always better. Virtual is also good. The importance of community was illustrated by a study called the Rat Park. Now this comes from addiction medicine. This is where scientists took rats who had been put in a cage by themselves with either an opiate-laced water or regular water to drink. And scientists wanted to see, what do you choose? What do you prefer? How addictive are opiates? And of course, they found that the mouse went to the opiate-laced water over and over again. I can't remember if the rats tended to overdose and die or if they just used. But then, later on, psychologists looked at that study and said opiates are addictive and said, well, sure, but let's take that rat and put that rat in a rat park where rats can do all sorts of fun things. They can play with toys, they can eat whatever they want, a variety of different kinds of foods, they can have sex. And what they found is rats that were isolated and using this opiate water all the time started to select regular water when they're with their community. So I think that just shows how critical community is, and often these weird beliefs that people develop can be a way to seek community. So if people are odd and eccentric and they're seeking community, it's hard to tell if that's harmful or not. For example, Star Wars and Star Trek, some people can't tell the difference, which to me, that seems like an odd belief, and those people are dead to me. So, let's see, there is a stigma for both eccentricity as well as illness. So, flat earthers. Flat earthers have a harmless belief. The earth is flat. Flat earthers get into a great deal of research and meetings and meeting each other and online community to discuss how frustrated they are that no one else believes what they believe, and what that does is bind them in a community. That they're finding community. Who cares? Let it be. Let it be, right? So, for people who believe that this is flat, harmless. Now, people who start to believe that there's a paranoid pseudo-community out to get them because they have this belief, all right, now we're starting to talk about something that's harmful, right? If someone believes that because I believe that the earth is flat, the CIA is going to come and persecute me, you can see that, well, that's kind of right into a mental illness there, kind of schizophrenia. But those kind of beliefs can clearly start to cause harm. So, how do we really, what is the essence of what I'm saying? I'm not going to tell you. You guys figure it out. All right. I'm getting a little off topic again. I think the big word to tell the difference is suffering. If an individual causes suffering, not only for themselves, but for family, for the community, or even for caregivers. If the actions of a person cause suffering in any of those realms, it may be an illness. Suffering. Let's hold on to that word, and not just for the individual. Because keep in mind, there's antisocial personality disorder. That is a psychiatric illness. Criminal thinking, and someone who acts like a criminal. That person does not suffer from this disorder. There is no suffering involved for the person. However, there is suffering involved for the community because they're engaged in criminal acts. So let's define suffering. This is not a clinically defined experience. If you look into any of the DSMs, I believe they all say if the disorder causes clinically significant distress, it should be treated. What is that? What is clinically significant distress? And why do psychologists always talk like we're smarter than everybody else? I kind of hate that language. So what we do, break that down. What I think suffering is experiencing uncontrollable, persistent psychic pain that blocks out the ability to perceive calm and positive thoughts. Experiencing uncontrollable, persistent psychic pain that makes it almost impossible to enjoy positive or calming thoughts or experiences. To me, that's suffering. And that's when I would begin to look at some interventions. For example, one of the interventions I would say is don't worry about being odd or eccentric. If you think that you're suffering because of something and you feel pain because of something, that's good enough to say that may be suffering, right? So don't spend too much time worrying about the eccentric things that we do. Let's focus on the things that might make us or others suffer. So what do you do if suffering is present? First of all, obviously, connect with your community. If you or others are suffering, if people you serve are suffering, community might be in fact, in almost every circumstance, it should be the very first thing to do. Open up to a close friend. Now, this is for people who are caregivers or people who don't have someone to care for. I'm not sure how I got off on that sentence, but I'm going to wrap it up now. So open up to a close friend. And I would say something about substances because I think a lot of us use substances responsibly. And I think that if there's not a risk, a glass or two of wine of night, who cares? But during this particular time when we're worried and this is not a calm time in our lives, I would watch very carefully any substances that are being used for anything, even kind of benign substances that are being used to calm us. Because what may have worked in just kind of a fun little way 6 months ago may work very differently now. So I would say substances obviously are being used. People smoke, people drink, however, we need to be careful about using those right now as a coping skill. And here's where we get to it. Consider talking to a therapist, if that's a fit for you. Now, I have seen hundreds of clients over the years, and fit is incredibly important. If a client seems uncomfortable with me in the first session, I typically will ask if they would like a referral, because fit has to be there. If you're looking for someone who's rather who's calculating, cognitive behavioral, find someone like that. If you're looking for someone who just enjoys talking with you and gives you pointers, find someone like that. So it may be that therapy could benefit more than we think. We just have to find the right therapist. And obviously, if any insidious threat of self-harm comes to your mind, call a professional. And if you feel really, I've said this before, but it bears repeating so many times, that if you start to get strange, intrusive thoughts about harming yourself, or any kind of thoughts about harming yourself or somebody else, take that really seriously right now. And always take it seriously, but especially during this time. Don't be afraid to call 911, go to an emergency room, or call a suicide hotline or a crisis line just to get some advice. So I would say do all those things. And obviously, we've talked about other forms, ways to cope with worry during this time. So I won't review all those, but please see episodes 1 through 3 if you'd like to check out some of those. So I'll leave you with this. I'm still worried about a second wave, and I'm worried about what will become of us financially. I think we all need to be prepared for these worries to continue for some time. And remember, we and you are resilient. We are stronger than we know. So be well, be safe, and be prosperous.